love that. If we show up in relationships and I need to be liked by this person, you are a prisoner to that person. Like, hear that. If you care what other people think, you are their prisoner. That is not a way to live life. Seriously, just reevaluate, who am I? What are my values? What do I stand for? And show up and be that. Stop making excuses that I can't or I shouldn't or I have to be. No, you don't. At the end of the day, you just have to be you. And if people don't like it, oh well, you'll find the people that like you. There's a lot of people in the world that are going to love who you really authentically are. Welcome to the Relationship Psychologist podcast, a place where we dive deep into all things relationships. I'm Dayna Mullen.
And I'm Alicia Hinger, and we are soul sisters, besties, and psychologists who are on a mission to change the culture of relationships.
Each week, we will discuss our expertise in the field of psychology, interview experts, spiritual leaders, and real people. Our goal in every episode is to give our listeners tools to implement in their lives today.
This podcast is not therapy, nor should it be a substitute for therapy, but instead we're here to motivate, support, and guide your conscious journey in this life.
The best way to support our podcast is to subscribe and give it a 5-star review.
Thanks so much for joining. Let's dive in.
Welcome. So good to see you.
Welcome back to the Relationship Psychologist podcast.
That's us. And today we're here to talk about, who are you really in relationship?
Who are you really? Doing some deep diving into who you are, what role you play, what you bring, maybe even a little accountability of like doing your own inventory of, assessment for what you bring. Yeah.
Yeah. Instantly, I'm just reminded of Zoolander, when he looks in the reflection in the lake and he says, "Who am I?" He says, I don't know. That's what I think of. Who am I? I don't know. Let's dive into who are you really?
Big topic. If you wonder what I'm doing with my hands, I should probably just disclose I have a cat. She hopped up here. She wants to join our podcast. So there'll be a cat in the podcast as per usual. You see me in my lap. That's why.
Always. Oh. You always, whenever I'm on your end at your place with you, I swear there's always like a dog or two or a cat or a chicken or like a goat back in the day. Always something coming in. So
who am I? Is lover of all things animals, and there's like a dog over there staring. There's a dog over there staring. There's other cats around here probably hanging out. So yeah, if you're in my capacity, you're going to realize that I am that human that invites in all the living things, all the creatures.
Yes.
My duck knocks on my door. She puts her little beak and she goes tick, 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 tick on the front door when she needs a snack. It's a thing now. The past week, she knocks on the door to get in and have a snack. It's hilarious. But what's someone's at your door? I'm like, oh, it's just my duck knocking. She just wants it.
We're going to have to at one point just do a funny reel of all of the creatures on your acreage because it's just fun. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now, but it's always a fun distraction because there's so many things.
It's true, but it's also part of who I am. People that come to see me as a therapist come to my office. I'm like, just so you know, you're coming to a barn and there's a good chance there's going to be an animal or 2 or 3 in our sessions. If you don't really like animals, you might want to pick a different location.
Or if you have an allergy to a particular animal, you might want to bring some else.
Yeah, I have Reactin and Claritin on hand at all times. Yeah. Or let me know and we can, meet you someplace else. But yeah, it's kind of part of who I am. And you know what? Talking about who I am. And so this is a funny story. This triggers a funny story. So 23 or something years ago now, before I was married with Jay, we were looking at, where we're going to live and building houses and stuff. And I was already back then. I took him to an acreage actually years ago, Ploss Energy. I don't know if you remember Ploss Energy, but they had horses. And so I took him to that because they were thinking about selling it back then. And I was like, please, I someday want to live on an acreage with my horses in my backyard. So it was already who I was back then. And he was like, no. But I planted that seed 20 plus years ago. And it took 17 or whatever years to flourish into a tree that now I'm on an acreage with my horses in my backyard, but it's part of who I am. And I had to negotiate that. I had to okay, not today. We're not ready for today, but just so you know, plant that seed for the future because it's part of who I am. And he knew that too, going in day one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love actually that you started with that, Leash, because it's so often people focus so much on either their partner or this idealized kind of relationship that they want. And they kind of lose sight sometimes of who they are and what they're bringing in the relationship. And I know personal on my side. My dad just recently passed, and when we were kind of speaking about him and reflecting on my parents' marriage, that was kind of the one thing that I took the most from my parents, was this balance of, there is a we, but there is a you, and there's an I, and they always encourage that I relationship. Like, I like to fish, go and fish. I like to do this thing with my friends, then go and do those things. And so this balance of like, don't change who you are in a relationship. Instead, be who you are in your relationship. Be that I, stand for what you believe in and what you really so desire in life, which for you was an acreage.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the things I ask my couples, my premarital couples, which of course we know we love those ones that come in early, is I'll say like, tell me the 5 things about your partner that drives you crazy. And like, not in a beautiful, like in a crazy way of like, they leave their towel on the floor, or whatever, their little bad habits. And if those never change, because they probably never will, can you live with them anyways? Like, do you accept them right now as they're, we all evolve and change and grow over time and space, but do you accept your partner as they are today? Not are you thinking, well, these things are annoying, but once we get married, once I train them differently or whatever, I'm in love with the potential, I'm in love with the future self. We're like, pause. Are you actually accepting of the here and now self? It's a big deal.
It is. Oh, it is, Leish. And I feel like the premarital couples, they don't know yet either. They're still in this fog of like love with each other. This oxytocin and vasopressin is still released. And they're like, oh my gosh, I love that you leave your underwear on the floor. And sometimes it's bigger things than that, right? Maybe sometimes they're a smoker and you're like, well, I kind of don't mind that. It feels like a bad boy or a bad girl kind of thing. But I remember that in my marriage too, when like my husband and I both had at a point where he had asked me something. He's like, I thought you were going to change that. And I had something different for him. And I was like, I thought once we had kids, you would stop that. And he was like, why? What made you think that I would stop that? And I was like, I have no idea. I actually just thought you would outgrow it. And he's like, but what made you think that? And I was like, I had an idealized version of what was going to happen, but I never shared it with him. Yeah. And so, you're right. Sometimes we futurize these relationships too much and we think things are going to change. But instead, really today, what we really want people to kind of grasp is we want you to self-evaluate who you are in this relationship. So we'll do another one on who your partner is. But right now, just slow down and we're going to ask some questions to start to reflect on who am I in this relationship?
Yeah, who am I? Absolutely. Which is a massive question. Massive question.
Oh, it is. It is. And I know we wanted to start with kind of like, what's my role in this relationship? So I know like I have a couple things written down of just some different roles that people take on that we see with some of our couples as well. Like, are you a doormat in this relationship? Are you such a people pleaser that you just let your partner walk all over you because you're kind and you're caring and you really just want to be so supportive that you just kind of let them do whatever they want to do in the relationship? Right? Because that's maybe,
right. Come into our office and blame the partner for their behavior might suck. Maybe it is not great behavior, but to look back and go, what am I contributing to that, to the relationship that I'm in? What am I contributing to the boat that I live in that maybe is sinking in some way?
Mm-hmm.
It's like being too nice or being a doormat, right? If you're like, well, they always do this thing. I'm like, well, you've allowed them to do that thing. That's just harsh. It's harsh to hear that, but you've allowed that and you've laid the foundation for that. Just like I love my partner to smoke. Use that example of what you said before, So I love my partner to smoke, but I thought they were going to change smoking. And now we're however many years in, or we have kids now. I thought you were going to change that behavior. Did you bring up to your partner before you got married? Hey, just so you know, it's a deal breaker for me before we get married. If you don't have a plan to quit, we should discuss that. No. Okay. So now you're 5, 10, whatever years in, and you're saying, so it was a deal breaker back then, but I didn't say that to you. I was just assuming you were going to change.
Yeah.
That's unfair to your partner.
No.
You have a chance to say yes or no. And so now you're throwing them once I'm in a relationship, we're committed. We have these kids and life and bills and things to pay. And now you're saying, oh, but that smoking thing was a deal breaker back then. Well, that's on you a little bit. It's on you to say, I didn't put that into the agreements early on.
Yeah. Yeah. Take that accountability. Yeah. Take that accountability, right? It's like just this is to be reflective of like, hey, I know when we say to our couple sometimes like, oh, you're being a doormat or you're a doormat, and they're like, whoa. It's like, no, we're saying this out of love. Like the goal here is to be very objective so we can see who you really are. And we want you to take that accountability because if you don't take accountability, you can't change things. And if you don't take accountability, you can't be trustworthy. So let's just start to kind of look at this and go, why am I like this? And what do I need to start? How can I have a conversation with my partner to be like, you know what? I've been a doormat, or maybe I've been really defensive, and I'm going to take accountability for that. I want to have conversations around this. That's always going to be a great way to enter into any conversation. Take accountability of your role.
Yes. Take account. So there's two things there. Take accountability. So own your shit, we say, which is true, 100% true. But know the difference between owning your shit and owning shit that isn't yours. So we'll listen to another podcast about blame, this idea of blame, which is, I think Brene Brown's video is so great to just watch that little video she has on blame. But the idea of, like, if you have kids, you know this well. Like literally this morning, my kids are heading off and someone can't find something and they're going to, Mom, where'd you put my shoes? Or Mom, I can't find my keys. And I'm like, I don't wear your shoes or I don't drive your car. So, right. But it's because they're frustrated, they're late for school or they're tired or whatever. So they're in their own stuff and then they're going to shift blame onto mom. It's kind of like the joke in my house. I'm like, when in doubt, blame the mom, right? If you have kids, but we do in our partnerships too. And so owning your shit, owning what, your role in your relationship that you helped create or co-create, but also having a boundary of like, that actually isn't mine. And I lovingly will say, I don't drive your car, but I can help you look for your keys if you want, but it's not mine.
Yes. And what I love about how you just said that, though, Alicia, is that you came across supportive rather than in a blaming way, being like, well, that's not my responsibility that you lost your keys. You say, you know what? Sounds like you lost your keys. Let me help you. So I'm not taking that, but I can still support you in this. And I think that's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. So with our partners, exact same thing. Maybe it's keys. Yeah. Maybe it's had a bad day at work and all of a sudden they're blaming you because the dinner's cold or who knows, like, doesn't matter. But knowing the difference in your own self, or doing our own self-evaluation here of when I'm taking ownership, accountability for my own stuff, that's true, which a lot of we're going to go over today is going to be true, but knowing the difference between when it's actually not your stuff and lovingly having a boundary of like, I'm not going to own that, but I can see what's happening for you.
Yeah. I love that. I have a couple other things just for ideas for people, like what is your role in your relationship? Are you the collaborator? Like, do you collaborate with your partner? Or are you like the parent in the relationship? Are you the one that is constantly taking care of everything and parenting, which can cause an imbalance, right, in the relationship, where then your partner might feel like, I'm constantly the child, like you're always nagging me about things. And so, again, taking that accountability of like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to be the parent anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll wait till you're done all your list and we'll go into kind of where those things came from in a second here, but let's continue with your list first.
Yeah. I'll just say a few more. I mean, you might be childish in the relationship, or you might be really emotional or really logical. We often see that like the dichotomous difference of one's really emotional, one's really logical. Are you really passive aggressive? Are you somebody who is really self-righteous or moralistic and not flexible, inflexible? Are you too trusting, or are you not trusting enough? Are you open? Are you closed? Are you vulnerable? So just kind of like, how am I showing up in this relationship? What is the role of the me in this relationship? And I think if people can just start to, as the day goes on, after they've listened to this podcast, just start to reflect on, who am I in this relationship? And then why? Why am I like that? Because that would lead into some really great conversation with your partner.
Yeah. Can I receive what my partner is giving out? Can I, right, do I take, like, what are the roles? And which is why I think we are so strong, or like we so stand in our foundation, our map of secure functioning, and that we agree to do certain things. We have a collaborative focus, very clear why and what and how, agreements, for example. I think it's such an important piece of what we do, because if we just are winging it, like a business, if we're just winging it, right? Then when things get tough, when I get emotional, or I get sad, or I get busy, or I get stressed, or whatever, I don't have a why. I'm then kind of free. It's kind of free for all, which is dangerous land.
Yeah.
I'm going to have those experiences. I'm going to feel out of sorts. I'm going to feel distressed. I'm going to feel dysregulated. But when I do, what is the agreement of what I do in this relationship? And so what role do you bring of when you're in that space? Easier to do when you're in, great space, when life is good and we're happy and, rainbows and sunshine, which is great. But when you're under distress, your true colors show up.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yes, they do. Yeah. And I think, I was just going to say, I just think that I know when we see our couples so often, they come in and there usually is that's blaming back and forth, right? Where it's like, well, he or she does this. And so really the idea around this is just notice who you are in this relationship, because every change starts with you. It really does. A lot of people can change their relationship just by their own self-acknowledgement and the work that they can do on themselves, because then they're showing up differently. So you change the dynamic instantly if you stop blaming, if you stop projecting, if you stop kind of taking that energy and throwing it at your partner. Instead, if you take that accountability and just go, I'm noticing these things that I do. If your partner can receive that and say, wow, thanks for saying that, rather than, yeah, you do that. Like, that's really annoying. Like, I mean, if we can have this culture in this relationship of like, let's both be a little bit vulnerable and like, let's just acknowledge who we are.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. For sure. I think then, going to like, what are your beliefs? Like, and where do those come from? Like, what do you believe about yourself? What do you believe about relationship? What do you believe about finances? What do you believe about sex? And what are the stories you're telling yourself about all of the aspects of relationship that you carry as a belief? To just essentially, I thought you about 1,000 times. That's all a belief is. So experiences, thoughts that I put together into this now belief system. And can I pause and go, oh, I'm bringing that to the table. I mean, we can think of thousands of examples in our office of things that people come in with and they wish their partner would do this thing for them that the partner didn't even know was a thing. Because they've never asked. Different if you ask 1,000 times, that's a different conversation. But if you've never asked, I just wish you would stop smoking, to use that example again, and your partner never knew that was an issue because you never said anything. Right? Yes. Or the other thing too, which is kind of a harsher truth, is I've been looking for my partner to fill me up. I'm externally focused because as a kid, I didn't get my needs met. And so I'm wired that way to look, as long as you tell me I'm okay, I feel okay. So I'm still looking for those attachment needs that weren't fulfilled as a kid. And then my partner doesn't do a good enough job because they get busy or they get tired or they're gone for work or whatever happens. I'm now dependent on that need for them to fill me up in that way that I get resentful.
Yeah. And you're alluding to one of the points that we'll get to too, of just kind of the history there, right? Like, where do I come from? What is my history? How is it showing up? But I want to back up for one sec, just because I love the way that you said that, Alicia. Like, what are the stories I'm telling myself, or what are the beliefs that I'm holding in this relationship that my partner isn't even aware of? Because those narratives become that reality, right? Our relationship is bad, aggressive. You make all the decisions. I feel like I'm doing everything. Whatever it is, what is that story that creates a belief, right? Because it starts as a story and then it becomes a belief, and then a belief becomes personalized as, this is who I am and this is my truth. So how can you start to maybe even just jot down, what are some of the stories that you tell yourself about your relationship, and maybe about who you are in the relationship, but also what is this relationship? What are the stories? Those are going to change your whole physiological response in that relationship. If I'm telling myself my relationship feels unbalanced, I feel like I do more responsibilities than my partner, I'm pulling more weight than he is, he's going to come home from work and I'm going to be already in that energy state, right? Because my whole being is, I'm doing more. You're not then doing enough.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The ideas of the beliefs of like, you're not feeling this need for me, or you're not feeling this need for our kids, or you're not feeling this, or maybe it's financial. I thought that we should be this financially stable, that you would pull this much weight in the relationship. And I feel like, and again, we didn't have those discussions early on. Fair enough. But as soon as you realize you have these beliefs, these stories that you're carrying, I think it's a great assignment to pause and look at all the areas of that bubble we talked about before. And what are the beliefs I carry and I'm bringing about all those areas of my relationship that maybe are unspoken and that I haven't been clear about. And are they true? Yeah. Like, are the beliefs that I'm carrying true?
And I would think that they all resonate from some part of a truth, right? Like, for sure, a part of, I thought that when we had kids, we would be parenting together, but you actually work 12 hours a day and we're actually not. So, wow, that does come from some truth that we didn't have a conversation about that, or possibly the finance. I thought you would take care of all the finances, but we actually never really talked about that. So again, these stories.
Yeah, no, they're massive. They're massive. That speaks to mine. Like, I think early on in my relationship, we were both very career driven, decided to have our first child. And again, it was kind of an unwritten assumption. I just thought we'd kind of share the load of child rearing and caregiving because we both had careers. And it became a point of contention about 6 months in. And I was like, I feel like I'm doing a whole lot more of this. And he was like, well, yeah, that's kind of that's the family he came from. And so if I would have when I leaned back and I was like, that makes sense that that's your belief. That's not my belief. We need to discuss this. We went and found, Stan, or some people like the Stans of the world. Stan tends to be our guy to go to usually, to like help hash that out of like, okay, different beliefs. So we hadn't really discussed this prior to, so now we're in it. And now there's some resentment building and we're noticing it. So help us navigate and create new agreements about, and then change these beliefs. Because maybe partner, you got to change your belief of me being the stay-home mom that you thought I would be.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you're kind of speaking to like that co-creating kind of that vision, right? Or that new story or the new vision of how do we want to be in this relationship together? Like, who are we going to be rather than who do I think that you're going to be?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the key. Okay. I think without a doubt, that is the first thing you need to really pause. We said this before and we'll say it again. Who are we? Who do we want to be? What are we co-creating together? And then what is my role in that? Because if I don't know what I'm creating, then this discussion is irrelevant.
Yeah.
But what are we creating? What do we want to create together? And we pause and go, oh, well, we're creating this, but I thought we would do it differently. Then we can assess our own roles and be like, oh, because my role is different than you thought it would be or than I thought it would be. So let's discuss the roles. But what are we creating? What's our vision first? That's got to be paramount first and foremost.
Yes. And I just want to say this actually, Alicia, we kind of both know a few people or clients even that are newer parents. And sometimes they're newer parents later in life also. So they've had this like career and this sense of identity and who I am. And then they get excited about this little child that comes in and it's so exciting. And at first it cultivates even more love and attachment with each other. And then it doesn't. Right. And then suddenly this beautiful little being has created some distance and some disconnection because there's a new story happening. There's multiple stories happening. Who is this child? Who are we now? Who am I now? And they have to start to navigate those conversations again of who are we going to be? What is the vision of us? What is the narrative of us with this little one?
Yes. And what is the story I tell myself about parenting and about who comes first and how do they come first and how do we do that? And what does that feel like to me? There's so many layers of there. There's so many layers. And add on the fact that we are probably not sleeping the way we thought we would sleep before. We're exhausted. We are, anxious, like having a newborn baby, they're dependent on us. So we're filling all these needs for somebody else. There's so many layers. We're going to have some people on talking about that pretty soon as guests. That's going to be great to dive into that topic. But yeah, there's any life transition is going to bring up this stuff that we're talking about, like, who am I? What do I bring to the relationship? And how is this transition? How is this event that's happening in my life triggering, or our life triggering my stuff, triggering my own stories, my own belief systems? And then diving.
And really, I think that what people need to kind of realize, the listeners, is that you are ultimately responsible to help your partner understand who you are really. It's my responsibility if I'm a new mom to tell my partner, my body doesn't feel right. I feel exhausted. I'm being triggered into some past stuff that happened for me. I'm feeling not seen, whatever it is. Like, it is your responsibility, or I'm starting to tell myself new stories that is not real. I know that my brain is filling in the blanks of like, you just looked away from me. And now I've just said to myself, you don't care about me. And now I have that story that's starting to run. I want to say it now. I don't want it to continue. Can we talk about it? So it is your responsibility to start taking accountability for who are you and how you're showing up and what's really going on for you, because your partner can't mind read.
Yeah, it's huge. I had a couple a while ago that was talking about that exact thing, having a baby. So she was pregnant, obviously. And so her body was changing and she had some body image stuff from previous. And so as her body changed, her story was, I love hosting a baby and I love the creation that's happening in my body, but she was really struggling with the change of her body. Like, it was a big deal for her. And so she pulled away sexually from her partner for her own stuff. And so when they came to my office, that was their fight. It was like, baby's born now and they're having a hard time becoming intimate again. And there's, other things of like, now she's like, I feel like I'm a milk truck. I feel like these breasts are no longer for playing, for sex. And so I had to create some boundaries. But what came up in the session was he was like, well, I felt you pull away during pregnancy. So I wanted to honor your space. Like, you're growing our child and I wanted to give you the space. And I tried to just other stuff for you and she was like, I thought you pulled away because you thought I was ugly. And he was like, no, I was so hard for me to not want to like ravage you. I thought you were so sexy. And she was like, I thought I was ugly. That was a story she was telling herself in the moment. And so when she pulled away, he felt it and he was like, oh, okay, I feel that. I'm going to honor her space because she's growing her. So they had totally different stories. And so in the session, they're like, she's like, you thought I was sexy? He was like, the sexiest. And she was like, damn, I had no idea. Right. So yeah, he's like, your body blows my mind how amazing it is now. And she was like, really? He's like, even now, like, she's like, well, postpartum, a little bit of extra stuff. And he was like, I still think it's like, I loved your body before, but I love it more now of what it can do. It was mind blowing for her. She was like, I had no idea. And so not sharing those beliefs, I'd like, imagine if you would have went back in time and said to him in the real time, I'm having this body image stuff that's my own stuff. And my perception is that I don't feel sexy. And he was to be able to say that in real time, it would have changed, right, their dynamic early on in the relationship. So, I mean, they came pretty early, which was great. I saw them one time and that was it. And they're like, oh, we're good.
Yes, I think, and for a lot of couples, it's hard to be vulnerable like that, depending on maybe some of their history too, right? Of feeling like maybe abandoned, or it wasn't safe to kind of say how I was feeling, or I've never been in a supportive relationship. But yeah, I mean, a starting point of just acknowledging that story and writing it down and being like, do I need to talk to a therapist about this first? Do I not maybe feel like our relationship is ready for that? Do we want to do couples work? Or but I've always suggested to my couples to get a couples journal. If you're somebody who has a hard time being vulnerable and talking openly, get a journal where you guys can write back and forth in it. It's a starting point.
Yeah, just to share this is my experience. I'm not blaming or shame. I'm just sharing, hey, in my own system, this is what's happening and again, using that parts language before, a part of me is just experiencing some body image stuff, whatever. Yeah, it's a great, and you'll be surprised often at your partner's response of like, oh, I didn't know that was your thing. Yeah. Like literally last night, so Jay and I were having a discussion last time, my husband and I were having a discussion last night. And so I'm doing, my own work. And one of my assignments was to get a massage from my partner. And so I said, oh, we have to do this assignment. He was like, great. And so he gave me a massage last night before we went to the game. And we were driving home from Drew's hockey game last night. And he was like, that was really great. I've massaged you for like years. I'm like, I know, it's been a long time. He's like, I forgot how great your body was. And he was saying these great things. And I was like, and I said, I felt my parts. And I was like, I feel like now I probably should give you one. Like, I kind of feel like he was like, why do you think that? I'm like, well, I just feel like, it was really great. And I loved it. Thank you so much. But I feel like now I kind of owe you. He's like, stop. He's like, let me do this for you. Like, can you just receive it? Like he said to me, the debt balance of the debt sheet I have for you is way bigger. And I'm like, no, he's like, yes, it is. He's like, I know that, I work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. So the business of the home, the business of the kids is mostly on your shoulders. And I mean, we know that, but for him to say that and say, so this is my way of just something I can do for you that's not, that will sink into your body. That's not flowers or compliments. That will actually let me just give that to you. He said, let me feel like it's a way that I can pay some of that debt in a loving way. And I kind of had to sit there and be like, my parts first were like, Dad, like, you don't owe me anything. But I paused and was like, but that's his experience. That was his story. And so could I just let my parts be like, can I just receive it as love, as just a love language, and like really accept that he's offering that? And it landed in this place of like, that's really cool. Thank you. Yeah. So being able to, so knowing your own stories of receiving, which obviously is hard for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, Leash, not keeping score. Like, I think that you kind of alluded to something that couples tend to do too, right? Where it's like, well, I did this, so you should do this. And that, although it seems like it's trying to balance out the relationship, it actually creates like this disconnect of you owe me or something, but instead just receive. And what a cool challenge that would be also for people to just be like, maybe one night be like, I just have to receive from you. And then the next night you have to receive from me. And whatever that looks like, whether that's a massage or I don't know, I make you dinner or I plan the night, or I don't really know what it could be, but just
whatever. Yeah. Yeah. It would challenge you to know what your receiving language, like love languages, knowing what your receiving language feels like. And I do think those languages, change over time and space too. Right. There's a funny book I used to my young couples, when you have babies, love language before babies maybe was like dinner and movies and things. Sure. Love language after babies is like you vacuuming and doing the dishes or putting the kids to bed. You're like, that's it. That's like pornography for me as a new mom, right? Or as a new parent. So they definitely, yeah.
They do, the love languages. And also you kind of alluded to like the values, which is always a big one that I love to preach to people is like, know what your values are. That's also how you show up in your relationship. What do I value? And they do change. When you have a new baby, you value something different than when you're, newlyweds. So what are my values? And am I actually aligning and standing for those values? And if I'm not, take an inventory of that. I had a client recently who was talking about honesty, and she said, I was an individual session, and she said, do you think I should tell my partner this? And I was like, well, what are your values again? You have them written down. And she's like, I'm like, is honesty on there? And she said, yeah. And I was like, well, why would you even ask that? Like, if you want to live in alignment, take some accountability. Yeah. Just be honest then. You have to know what you stand for. And if you don't, then you're not taking accountability. You're not taking your own inventory.
Yeah. And we'll get into this in the next podcast when we do the couples thing about knowing who your partner is, but then honestly evaluating, are there topics that are off the table? Because there may be. We'll talk about that later. But I think honesty is huge. I'm not going to not be honest. We're going to be honest, but we have agreements around certain things, like maybe talk of religion or whatever. We'll get into that. But yeah, that we value honesty and we're going to do honesty no matter what. And we have agreements on how we do honesty and what that looks like. And softly, on those things for sure. Yeah.
Definitely. And another big kind of pieces of that we wanted to chat about was what do I do for my relationship? So what do I do to help cultivate this secure relationship? Or if it's an insecure relationship, take some accountability of what am I doing in this relationship? Am I causing more disconnection because I'm ignoring my partner? I'm, being rude or dismissive to my partner? Or am I somebody who is, cheerleading with my partner and I'm building us up, or I make time for us to go on dates or to have intimacy or to have little connection talks? Like, how do I lead in the relationship?
Yeah, for sure. And making time for those things and showing up authentically, not showing up on the date or our time in or our coffee dates with an agenda of I'm talking about the kids, talking about finances, or being at work where I'm with my partner. I'm going to show up and I'm going to make this space and time. I'm actually going to give you, we said this before, it's a business. And if we don't show up and put time into the business, it's going to fail. Just like into anything in life, a plant, water, it's going to die, right? So how am I showing up? Am I authentically showing up in space and time with you, curious about you? I mean, there's something about knowing your partner in different levels throughout their time. You are the living record of their life. And so if I'm not updating those records on a regular basis, I don't know your life. But there's something about novelty too, of like, we change and grow all the time. And so I'm paying attention to my partner's changing habits, beliefs, passions, interests, whether it be music, whether that be, movies they're watching, whether that be books they're reading, whether that be job challenges, and having updated regular maps of your partner's world. Mm-hmm. Showing up with that curiosity. Or if I'm not, why am I not? What's getting in my own way? They're my own defenses, my own things, my own stories, my own stressors. They're getting in the way of me showing up in this relationship. And then can I be accountable for that?
Yes. Yeah. I love that you just said that. Curiosity is such a big one too. Like, am I showing up in curiosity in my relationship? Like, hey, how was your day? Tell me more. I noticed that you seem a little bit disconnected. Tell me more about that. I noticed some sadness, whatever it is. Like, just can we be curious? Because we're leading in this relationship. So we're not talking about our partner yet. We will in the next episode. But just right now, how am I showing up? And even doing an inventory. I know we like to do this with our couples where we say, kind of rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 10. 10 is awesome. 0 is you failed. How good are you at showing up in this relationship right now? And if you say a 5, nobody wants to be with a 5. So, evaluate, what am I doing that's keeping me at a 5? And what do I have to start doing to get me up to an 8 or a 9 or a 10?
Yeah, I think it's a great assessment tool, like a self-evaluation, like a review of your performance, your own performance. So, and if you're not sure, you can ask your partner to help you with this too. Be like, hey, I'm just going to review. And we do this with our couples all the time. And then I usually laugh because they'd be like, yeah, I think I'm an 8. And I'm like, really? Because I'm evaluating them as they're talking, thinking you've missed all of these boats that have gone by. And I ask their partner, do you think they're at 8? And they're like, I'm like, can you be honest about what you think they're at? Right. So do a self-evaluation first, knowing this, we've done that already, the agreements, the secure functioning. We've done the, what does it take to make this relationship highly function, safe and secure, long-term, what we're looking for. And so what am I contributing to that bubble? And do a self-evaluation and be like, I'm really good in these areas, but yeah, I've been really slacking over here. And can you own that? Can you own that? And there's lots of reasons why. There's no blame. We're just saying, yeah, you know what? I've been really slacking at X, Y, and Z because I've been really focused on A, B, and C over here. Okay.
Yeah. And then maybe you can have a conversation and say, how can we best support each other in our parts where we're feeling maybe a bit under functioning or a bit weaker? Like, well, don't worry, I'll overcompensate over here because I actually love to do that. I want to help support you. So it's just when we're leading with taking accountability, we're already leveling this playing field of creating a culture of safety and security, because it's not blaming, it's taking accountability. I know that I am showing up like this. And here's what I think I'm doing really well. And here's where I think I'm not doing so well. And then maybe your partner will follow with that. But if they don't, that's not the exercise anyway. Right now, it's just a starting point of taking your own accountability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have some questions here, for my masterclass. It's going to be available soon here, hopefully. But one of the, journal, I've got this little journal I goes with the class, but some of the questions kind of go along with that. Like, what are common triggers for your own self? Like, what are the things that cause you to feel triggered, or cause you to feel defensive? What situations or emotions are often activated in response to those situations? So do you know situations for you that activate you where you feel defensive or withdrawn? And then what do you look like when you're defensive? Do you puff up and get, loud and try to defend and get verbal about that and try to blame? Do you withdraw? Right? Do you get small? Do you get doormatty? Do you get martyrish? Like those kind of words you used earlier. How do you respond in a triggered kind of, or a, distressed kind of state? Can you identify when you've been hijacked by one of those parts? When you're in defensive, can you identify that? Because if you're all of a sudden hijacked by a defense part and you're unaware of it, now your partner's just getting that from you, or your coworkers or your kids are just getting that angry part or that defensive part, that hijack part. And so can you identify that part in you, which is really important? And then what do you do to soothe that part? What do you do to lean back and go, oh, I can see that my anger or my fear or whatever is hijacking the situation and it wants to speak for me. And how do I do my own self-soothing recognition of that to bring those parts back into alignment? So I'm leading again with self-energy. And then again, one of the beliefs and stories. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to say one thing to that. Just to add to that, Alicia, is that there's a story behind this trigger, right? So, what is that story? And can I tell my partner what that is? Oh my gosh, I've recognized that, the part of me that's triggered right now, there's a story around this. And so that's why I'm getting defensive or shut down or whatever it is.
Yeah. And they might be minor. They might be, something that you can, I give another example that happened this summer with us, but yeah, that's exactly that question. What are the beliefs or stories you carry that are surrounding that moment, that part of that that's being triggered? Yeah. It could be something, minor. Like I was in a situation this time where we were having a conversation and I kept getting cut off and like 1,000 times cut off. And I was going to tell just a minor story that was relevant to the situation. And I paused and I, in the moment, leaned back and was like, I felt myself feeling frustrated, but I was like, what part of me is feeling triggered? And it goes all the way back, right? It goes back to like childhood of feeling like I didn't have a voice. Like I chose attachment over authenticity. And so I silenced my voice to not speak my truth, to like fit in. And so in the moment, I actually felt that. And I was like, well, is it important to me to speak my voice right now? Or is just, but really it was more important for me just to pause and notice it and validate it in my own system. To lean back, I did it. And I was with actually another therapist. We're having a dialogue. She was in part of the conversation. And I said to her in real time, I'm like, I'm doing some parts work right now. And then she said, what's coming up? And I said, yeah, this is coming up in real time. I'm like, I'm feeling this part of me. And my husband was kind of listening, kind of like, oh God, here she goes. And then she said, what was the story you're going to tell? So I ended up telling the story that I was going to tell that was original to the conversation, but it's pertinent work to be doing. Even though I know this stuff, I still get triggered. We've been doing this for 25 years. We still get, and I'm like, whoa, what's coming up for me right now? And it wasn't huge. It was a little minor frustration, a little minor resentment. But if I wouldn't have done my work, I might have felt more resentful towards the others who had no idea, right? In that conversation, no idea what's happening. Rather than resentful, I felt gratitude of like, oh, I recognize you. I know this feeling well. What is this? This is, I recognize this voice that felt silenced in her past. I get you. And even just then, I felt better. I didn't have to even say my story. I felt better just having that moment in time of validation. That's all your own work.
Yes, it is. It is. I mean, this kind of who are you? What are you doing? What do you really want? Like just how self-aware are you at what's going on internally for you? What are your triggers? What are your emotional reactions, which are triggers? But, like what is happening for me and how do the people that I trust around me, how do they know who I am? Not everyone's going to know who you are, but right now we're talking just in a partnership, even whether that's a really close friendship or, your intimate partner. How well do they know you? And I think that I want to just give a couple examples too of just how you can identify some of the good things that how you're showing up in your relationship, right? Like sometimes we take care of each other by nurturing the relationship through food. But maybe you're somebody who is a baker or the cook, and you're like, I take care of our relationship by feeding us or giving us, vitamins, or I'm the funny one and I make us laugh and I make us dance silly in the living room. Like these are some things that you're like, I do these things to create a culture of fun and connection. Like, so what are those things that you do that kind of feed that energy in your relationship?
Yeah. We went to a birthday party this weekend, and it was a traditional Filipino debut, it's called. And I said to my husband after we left, I'm like, man, that was so fantastic, like so amazing. I was kind of mind blown at how much fun they have and how much, here we are, these little, Canadian, proper, they're like, and so the DJ guy was like, come on, get up here and sing. And I was like, oh, I don't sing. He's like, you're at a Filipino party. Everyone sings here. And I'm like, so he's like, okay, we'll get up and dance. Again, I was like, I don't really dance. Right. And I'm like, they don't care. Like the people that were at that party were like, this is what we do. And the amount of joy, the amount of like openness that they had, it was like contagious. I left there and was like, that's my mission. I'm going to learn what is that part of me that feels contained? Like, why am I so afraid of like embarrassing myself, singing out of tune, maybe dance? I don't know. I don't know. Everyone can dance. I have no moves, like as far as like, professional or look good. Who cares? It wasn't about perfect. It's about, can you move your body? Of course I can. And so what is in me? And I was again pausing and being like, what about me feels constricted and rigid and like, hidden and doesn't want to show those things. And my daughter was the same. She was like, I don't want to get up there and dance. And then of course, there were people that were like, we're going. I was like, okay, we're here for this party. We're here for these people that we love. So we got up on the dance floor. And then my daughter had to give a little speech. She didn't even know. She didn't have to, but they asked her to. And she was like, she was going to run out the door. And I was like, just do it for her. Like, just do it for AJ. And then she was like, okay. I'm like, great. What about us keeps us so contained than from being free? And that joy, that like openness, that like, that pure open joy. I don't even know what other word to use for it. What keeps us so contained in our parts? It was an interesting experience. But I'm like, man, these people know how to have fun. And I think we know how to have fun until I see them. And I'm like, they are in this place of just pure joy with no judgment. How lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, Leash, because I notice that's kind of how I've always seen you. So I remember being around your family. It was probably around your wedding time, and we were around a fire, and then people were passing around spoons, and some people had guitars and anything. And I remember being like, oh, yikes. Yeah. Like, this is like some kumbaya shit that is like, it's a little too much from what I could handle at the time. And that was my entry into, this is how your family operates. It's like, no, we all sing together and we dance and we have a good time. And I was like, wow. So it's interesting that you were just because it was your people, like, because when it's not your people, it was like, ooh, you were kind of the outsider and you were like, okay, this isn't. But if that was your friends and family, you would have been like, sure, let's get up on stage and dance and sing and have fun.
I think this context. I think that was the context. It wasn't the environment. If those same people from this weekend were around a campfire outside in the dark, I'd have been dancing and playing spoons. I don't care. But the fact that we were all in these fancy ball gowns and everyone's seated and kind of watching, and there was like, lights and focus, I was like, it was that. So I was like, what about me is really nervous about being in center stage? At the campfire, like if I'm with you or anybody around the campfire, I'll get some spoons out and sing off key. I don't care, because, kind of blends in with the background noise of the birds and whatever we're doing, right? But that was a microphone. So it felt way more formal to me, the context, rather than the people.
Yeah. That even kind of speaks to some of the question that we're asking right now is like, what do I do in this relationship and even in different environments, right? Like, some people show up differently in different environments in their relationship. Like when we're at, say, church, how do I show up in our relationship? When we're in front of people, how do I show up? When we're in private in our bedroom, how do I show up? When we're in front of our kids or our family of origin at Christmas time or Thanksgiving, how do I show up? So, wow, you just kind of gave me a big aha of like the environments kind of shape how do I show up in my relationship?
It's huge. It's huge. And can I do that authentically? Can I authentically show up, speaking my truth for myself and knowing I might wear a different hat in this context, but I'm not going to do it inauthentically. I'm going to do it knowing why. So if I have to put a hat on, for this, if I have to go assess somebody that misaligns with my values to the core, which I've done 1,000 times, right? And so I'm going to go assess this person that's got a criminal behavior of this sort. And so I'm going to put this hat on to assess this person. I'm going to show up authentically, but I'm going to have a really clear boundary. I'm going to do it differently then. So the same thing with Christmas dinners or Thanksgiving dinners or, singing on stage or, for me, I was like, I don't have a hat for that. Like, what's the hat I wear so I can just like not care about? I'm like, but I'm going to create that hat. I'm like, that was an invite for me to be like, I'm going to create that hat. And so I literally went to my son's game after, and we're still, and again, my husband's like, let's go home and change. I'm like, nope, we're wearing this. Who cares? We're going to wear our ball gowns to the hockey rink. And I don't care what people think. And people were like, well, where'd you guys come from? Because literally we were there last Sunday after your dad's funeral, all dressed up. And then we're there this Sunday after a party, all dressed up. So it was 2 weekends in a row. And people are like, you guys dress really well for like hockey rinks, right? So I'm like,
that's so funny.
What we do, and like, which is so nice.
Oh my
And I made a point of like at the rink. I was just like listening to the music, and I'm like, I'm just gonna like not care, and just like kind of just like I was standing behind the bleachers, kind of just like I'm gonna just enjoy the music and the people, and just gonna dance and see what it feels like.
I love that. And I know that you kind of talked about in one environment being very different, which I do agree with. When you work in a prison, let's say, and you're assessing an inmate, that's going to be a different environment. So I do acknowledge that there's different professional hats that some people have to wear. But the one thing that I live by and I preach is be who you are in all relationships, like in all situations. I don't want to change who I am when I'm in different relationships. If people don't like who I am, that's not really my problem. That's their problem. And I have no qualms about that. Like that's you. That's your interpretation of me. I am who I am, and I'm never going to change who I am. I don't assess people in jail, so I don't have to change who I am. There's not an environment that I have to change who I am in anymore, which I love.
Yeah. I am who I am, and I'm not responsible for people's opinion of me in that way. And not everyone's going to like me. Yeah.
That's okay.
That's okay. And for some people, that's one of the hats that they wear of like, but is that okay? It's not okay. I have to be like there to pause and be like, I need to be liked here. Like I need to look in the mirror and like this person that I am, that I see that I in the inside, I need to like that person first. Like, do I like her? Then the rest, I'm not walking around trying to please my environment, because if I authentically like her and like what I stand for and really like how I show up in the world, people that are aligned with that are going to show up. And people that maybe don't align are going to show up out of curiosity too.
Yeah. And then they'll leave, right? But I love that. If we show up in relationships and I need to be liked by this person, you are a prisoner to that person. Like, hear that. If you care what other people think, you are their prisoner. That is not a way to live life. Seriously, just reevaluate. Who am I? What are my values? What do I stand for? And show up and be that. Stop making excuses that I can't or I shouldn't or I have to be. No, you don't. At the end of the day, you just have to be you. And if people don't like it, oh, well, you'll find the people that like you. There's a lot of people in the world that are going to love who you really authentically are.
Yeah. And if you're still wearing that truth of I have to be liked, I have to show up so that they like me. If I'm still living in that prison world, which is a great visual, then that's your work to do. And that's your work to do to really lean back into who do I want to be, that I would respect, that I would love, that I would care about, that I would honor. Like, who do I want to be? Yeah, that's your work to be doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I like how you said that too. Like, can I look in the mirror and can I know who I am and love that person and be like, hey, there you are. We love you. I remember hearing Lady Gaga in an interview a long time ago saying that she looked in the mirror and she was like, I don't know who you are. Like, I feel so disconnected to that image on the other side. And she started to evaluate, and she was like, I'm saying yes to everything in my life. Yes, I'll sign that. Yes, I'll put my name on that. Yes, I'll do that thing. And she started to say, but I don't want to do those things. And so she started saying, no, I won't take the picture. No, I won't sign that. No, I won't put my name on that. And she said, I started to look in the mirror and I was like, oh, hi, I like you. Yeah. So sometimes it's just showing up, and saying, no, I can't do that. And maybe that's part of the accountability piece for yourself too, of like, you've been showing up as this like caretaker, people pleaser, all doer of everything. And now I'm going, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to balance this out because I don't know who I am anymore. And I look in the mirror and I feel like I don't like who I'm looking at.
Yeah, that's a gem. That's a gem of information right there. Are you prisoner to the outside world, or are you host to your self energy? Prisoner versus actual freedom, because real freedom, right? Viktor Frankl said it best, but real freedom lives within. That's where it really lives. And if you're a prisoner to the outside world in any context, you're not living in freedom in here.
Yeah. And I mean, lots of people can be a prisoner to the future too, right? Of like, I'm anxious about this happening or this reality or whatever it is. It's like, be in the here and now and be with yourself and really start to dive into, who am I right now? And do I love the person that I'm being? And if I don't, start to make an inventory of how you want to make the changes. That who do you want to be? Because you really can create that. but it starts with that evaluation of like, who am I a prisoner to, or what is my role in the relationship, or, or how, another question that we wanted to say was, what do I do for myself? Like, how do I fill my own bucket? Or self-love, sometimes people will say, like, what do I do for myself? A lot of times when I ask my couples that too, they'll be like, nothing. What I do for my kids, I take care of this, and it's like, but what do you do for yourself? I'm like, make a list of like 20 things that you love to do and do at least one of them a day. Sometimes it might be really little. It might be, I'm going to have a tea and I'm going to read for 20 minutes. That could be your self-care.
Yeah, for sure. Because if you're the tree and you're not self-watering this tree, again, you're relying on the environment to water you. That's burdensome to your environment, and it's not authentic to self. You're then still prison. You're still in prison to the environment. You're dependent on the environment, which again, as children, we are. That's a different conversation. We're adults, no longer dependent on our environment the same way we were as kids. So what are you doing to self-water, to self-nurture this plant that is you? And then how are you teaching others, right? You teach others how they treat you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you have to not tolerate others mistreating you. I actually just had this weekend. I'm glad that you brought that up. I saw a quick little meme of Brene Brown, and she said what they taught their kids was that inside of your hands here, you hold a flame, and that little flame is your self essence. That's you. And so when you go out in the playground and you're playing with those kids, if some kid comes up to you and goes, that's not somebody that you want to be playing with. That's not the kind of person you want to be. You want to have friends who are trying to cover up, like when the storm comes, they're like, hey, come on, let's cover up your flame, like they've got your back, they're protecting you. And this happened at a birthday party with my daughter. A kid was really rude to her, and she couldn't even remember what the person said. It just jarred her so much. She was just bawling. And I was like, that little girl, she blew out your flame. And then she started bawling some more. And I was like, it's okay. We can relight that flame. But just that awareness of, and I know I'm branching it to like a child for a second here, but that, sometimes you're in relationship with somebody who isn't seeing into you, who isn't, honoring that person that you are. And if that's the case, take an inventory of those relationships also. Maybe there's friendships out there that they're blowing out your little flame. And how many times are you going to let them blow out your flame before you gas them?
It's true. We did that boundary one that was so important. The boundaries are sexy episode. So important of evaluating those relationships and who honors your flame, who blows it out or tries to blow it out, who protects it, right? And so knowing the boundaries of how far away they are from your core system, of how far away they are from your relationships. But for self energy, being like, I am paying attention to those that do blow them out or try to blow it out. And therefore I have a boundary now. I have a boundary, which is hard to do sometimes for people like me, hard to do, right? But a boundary of this flame is important to me. This flame is my life energy. This flame is a gift. I am a gift. The fact that I'm here living and breathing. I just think about that. Just the fact that out of all of the sperms and eggs it could have met in the moment in time to create your life and all the things that could have gone wrong. But yet here you are. Like it's the history of the world that you show up at this point at this moment in time is an absolute miracle. It is a gift to be and not to have that flame. Like it is a gift. So lean back and be like, I'm going to honor the shit out of that gift. And I'm going to notice those that try to blow it out and be like, ooh, I see you. I'm going to stay far from you in the playground. But in our lives, how many shoulds do we have? Are we carrying stories, right? I think of the visual of like a garden because I like trees. So I'm like, if I'm a plant in the garden, people have planted ideas and beliefs, and stories in my garden without my permission, all the way through even into adulthood. So the you should have them in your life because they're a family member. You should have them in your life because they did this, or you should because they're your teacher, or whatever it is. Really? Like lean back and go, I'm going to honor the share of this flame. And so I don't believe in shoulds. There's no such thing as shoulds. I will pluck that weed out of my garden really quickly, and I'll make sure that there's just space there for another one to grow if need be. But I'm plucking those weeds out of my garden because it's my garden. I get to cultivate now who and what in my garden honors that flame the way I do.
I love that. And you know what? I think we were originally talking about kids, but even as adults, like you're saying, we have this flame too. And like, so what are those relationship dynamics that are possibly blowing out your flame? And is there enough, safety in the relationship to be able to say that to somebody, to say, you just blew out my flame.
Yeah. Or you tried to. You tried
Well,
to.
you tried to. Yeah, you really, but I mean, sometimes it might feel like they really did, like it was that harsh. And then if the person goes, what are you talking about? And like, and you explain what that means and they dismiss you and they disregard you and they gaslight you. Um, you got to take that information and decide, is that this is probably a relationship that if they're not willing to take any accountability of how they hurt you, you should, you get into therapy or you got to get out of that relationship. But I think that it's important, if it's a relationship that you actually value, to have that conversation of, you know what, I notice that when I'm around you, you tend to try to blow up my flame. And I really want to change the dynamic of this relationship, because that's my own self-care too. I have to protect that flame. So I either have to protect it from you, or I have to help educate you on what you're doing and how it's affecting me.
That is self-care. That is the essence of self-care. Everything else contributes to that flame as the visual. Everything else contributes. So you need to be the master gardener of that flame. That is your job. That is your job, to be the master gardener. And we're going to teach our kids that. And what we didn't get as kids, we're going to cultivate now as adults and go, I am an adult now. I'm the gardener now. My parents aren't the gardeners anymore. And my caregivers aren't the gardeners anymore. I'm the gardener now. So I'm going to then be really mindful of what seeds get carried by accident into my garden that are growing. And I'm like, ooh, that's a weed. And am I going to allow that weed to try to blow up my flame? And if I do, that's on me to be like, I'm allowing that person in my life and they treat me this way and blow up my flame. And I'm still like, it's okay. Like you said, am I the pleaser? Am I the doormat? Right. So then to own the truth of like, I am actually allowing that person to blow up my flames. When I come in my mouth and say it's their fault, I'm like, will you set the stage to allow this? Like, they're in your life and you let them treat you this way. So if I let my dog continue to bite me, and I said, stop now. All of a sudden one day stop, he'd be like, but this is what we do when we play. I treat you this way.
Yeah. Or maybe you're the type of person where you're constantly blowing out your partner's flame all the time. You're the blamer. You're the one who's getting, who's passive aggressive. You're the martyr. You're the gaslighter. I mean, you're a flame blower outer is what you are. And so you need to take accountability for that, because you both have a flame, and ideally you want to come together and get, have more of a flame together rather than blow it out.
Or if you're the one that's aware that we have different ideas of what flame guidance is, mm-hmm. They really don't align on some deal breaker things, but I'm too scared to say it, or it's been under the rug. We have this thing that we don't align on, that we both know is a deal breaker. We're not discussing it. If you're aware of that, bring it to the table. As hard as that is, if you don't bring it to the table, and let's say you're aware that I want kids and you don't, or whatever they think, you're smoking or religion or who knows, whatever, 1,000 topics it can be, but you're aware of it and you're withholding that information, you're not just putting their flame out, you're putting your own flame out because you have no integrity. This flame you're holding, you're not holding it in the highest regard. You're actually minimizing your own flame. So you're going to live in that space of resentment and that rigidity and that closed offness. So if you're going to honor this flame, that means having the highest integrity for self, that I'm aware of this thing. Oof, I gotta have hard conversations. I gotta call hard truths out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think taking an inventory of how am I strengthening this flame? What is my self-care rituals, or what are the conversations I need to have to kind of keep this stuff going? The building up our pocket, our self-care, our garden, our flame, whatever analogy kind of lands, is really important. And I know the last thing we wanted to talk about quickly, Leash, was just the fact that there's going to be some history that's going to come up. I know we talked about stories, but there might be some childhood kind of history stuff that shows up in your relationship. And not everybody is an expert on their attachment history, and we're not expecting people to be. It's a good thing to go to a therapist to kind of start to dive into, but you can even just be aware of it. Like you said earlier, if there is something that triggers you, like, ooh, just a sec, I'm going to get curious with myself. Where is it coming from? Like, where do I notice that in my body, or what story is coming up? Like, oh my gosh, I just had a flashback. I'm like in grade 5 and my parent said this thing to me, and suddenly I'm in that moment. And now I realize I actually have a trigger around that. And so I need to be aware of that. Or, did I come from an environment where it wasn't safe, where I was alone all the time, where I was scared, where maybe my parent was drinking. And so, what is that kind of history that's showing up? This is my stuff that's showing up in this relationship.
I watch my parents do this thing. And so now when I'm being triggered in real time, I'm like, ooh, that reminds me of my parents in this thing. And my reaction to that was this. My reaction to that was to minimize or to defend or to block and get in between or whatever. And I'm noticing I'm doing those same behaviors, those same rituals now, because that mirrors what I did as a kid. So yeah, all those attachment questions that we ask, all those, questions that we've talked about in different podcasts, like, how did your parents, what did the relationship look like? Like if what would your 10-year, if I was asked your 10-year-old self, tell me about your parents' relationship, what would your 10-year-old self say? Looking back now, what do you say? How did they show love? How did they disagree? How did they do conflict? How did they do repair? How did they manage money? Right? How did they show affection to each other? How did they show affection to you? How were you honored in your parents' eyes? Like, were you seen, valued, and known and understood and loved for who you are, for what you did, for how you performed? Like, there's so many layers to those attachment questions that, that will show up in our adult relationships.
Oh, definitely. And did you have any losses of any kind, any deaths, and how was that processed? Who did you crave attention from the most when you were a child? What relationship did you have individually with each parent? Like, who was your dad in your eyes? Who was your mom? How would you describe that relationship? Not the person, the relationship with them. Yeah. And when, if you were scared, how did they respond to you? If you were angry, if you were frustrated, did you cry? Yeah. Kind of just really evaluating, how does my history show up in this relationship? Rather than blaming my partner, I'm going to take accountability for, that's my own stuff. I'm not responsible for what happened to me, but I am responsible for how I let it affect me. That's my job.
Yeah, like if my story as a kid was vulnerability was, terrible. We were allergic to vulnerability. We didn't do vulnerability in our family of origin. And now as an adult, I show up and vulnerability shows up and I'm like, oh, we don't do that. I get, right? That's my stuff. That's my family of origin. That's my attachment system stories from childhood that we didn't do vulnerability, right? So asking those questions, like, how was I responded to when I was vulnerable as a kid? Like you said, scared or sad or upset or someone passed away or needed, like, who showed up for me? How did they show up for me? And what were the things that they did or said to soothe? Like, how was I soothed in distress? Those are my blueprints. Those are my nervous system, neuroception starting points. And so now I'm going to bring those to my adult relationships. And so when you're like, oh, I don't know if I shut down when these things happen, or I get big, or I get defensive, pause and go, might that have came from someplace else? Like, might this moment in time be just actually triggering past experiences, weeds in my garden? I can pause and go, hold that thought for a second. Let me just process this for a second. I got to pull some weeds out and take a look at those and go, those actually were never mine. Those are planted there by somebody else, and I don't believe those anymore.
And I mean, the ideal with a secure relationship is that we have some safety and some vulnerability where we can talk about these things, and your partner gets to be that new proxy, that new person, that new attachment person to say, well, you know what, that sucks that happened, and I'm sorry that happened, and I won't let it happen again. Your partner's not responsible for what happened to you, but they do hold some responsibility of helping you repair that, because we're hurt in relationships and we're also repaired in relationships. And what a better place to repair than in your intimate relationship. That's the ideal one if it has the safety and security necessary.
And if you can bring that truth to the table. This is my thing from my past. I've noticed I'm doing this thing, showing up in our life now, and owning that. Like, I'm not saying this is your fault. I'm owning that. Hey, when this happens, I know my reaction is this based on what I've now realized is my past history. And then your partner can show up and be like, oh, because now you've told your own accountability. You're not blaming them. You go, oh, I do recognize that. Man, I'm sorry that happened to you. And then that's where that process comes in, where you can have a dialogue of repair and healing and growth now in real time. Again, you're teaching people how to treat you. You're teaching them how to work with you in real time. If you project, they're going to get defensive. If you come with accountability of like, I'm recognizing what this is, and you ask them, I'm just asking you to like, help me process this through. They'd be like, okay, that's very different.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love this. I feel like there's some really good kind of like take home messages for people to kind of start to self-evaluate, right? Like, who am I in this relationship? How do I rate myself? Yeah. What are my roles in this relationship? How am I showing up? What are the stories that I'm telling myself, or the beliefs that I'm holding in the relationship? What is the history of my childhood that might be showing up? And how do I actually take care of myself?
Yeah. Bang on. These are good ones. Who are you? Yes. What are you doing? And why? Take a second to take some inventory of who you are, how you show up, what's important to you. Yeah. Rather than discharge blame initially, pause and go, what might I be contributing? What might I be contributing to the co-creation of my life in all relationships, in my finances, career, in my joy, in my happy, in my lack of joy, in my resistance.
Yeah.
Ooh, what was my story around that?
And this is the juice of building some trust in a relationship. I mean, accountability is how you trust somebody. If people can't take accountability, you can't trust them. So this inventory today is really, how do I take accountability for my role, which is going to help cultivate some more safety and security and trust in your relationship, because you're already making the first step, which is your own self-evaluation.
For sure. If there's one thing you can do for yourself in your lifetime, I think that's the investment to make. It's this, the investment in who am I? What am I? How do I show up? Why do I show up that way? Getting curious about self. It's a massive investment because it's going to pay off in all other areas, all other relationships. But start with this one. Yeah. Invest in relationship, understanding and knowing who you are and why you do what you do. And just so you know, the caveat is you start that process, it's never ending. Just like I said, this summer, having that dialogue with some colleagues, I was pausing, being like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit triggered. What is that? And I kind of went into this, like I literally was on the couch and I leaned back and was like, what's happening for my body right now? Interesting. And kind of just took a pause from the conversation and felt my own stuff and did some self-work. And it builds my parts, my committee that, my emotions, my logic, my body, my stories, like all of my parts around the table know that I will do that. So they can bring it up and be like, she'll take care of us. So my self-trust is a building process over time and space and getting better and better.
Is. Yeah, I love that you said that, Alicia. It's an important thing for people to realize that even though we've been doing this for so long, we still have our own stuff, and we still have our own stuff in all of our relationships. And there's no top of the mountain that we're trying to get to. It is a journey through ups and downs in understanding who we are and who we are in relationships. So don't feel like you have to have some role model of like, this is the ideal of who I want to be, because they have their own shit. Everybody does.
For sure. We're all doing our work.
On the journey.
Yeah, we're all doing. Awesome. Okay, go explore yourself. Go do some inventory. Take inventory. Do a performance evaluation of how you're showing up, and you can do it in relationship. Obviously, we're going to promote relationship inventory of how you show up in relationships. But you can. How am I showing up in work? How am I showing up in my financials? How am I showing up in my career? How am I showing up in my parenting? You can do an inventory of all the different areas, but do a performance review of yourself, of how you're showing up, hold yourself accountable. And then that's the open door to deep dive into where I can do better, because you honor the shit out of this flame.
Yes.
Like, man, it's
honor the shit out of this flame. I love that. That's a good endpoint. Thanks for joining us, and keep that flame bright and strong.
Sounds good. See you next time.
See you.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We're really glad you're here with us on this journey.
The best way to support this podcast is to subscribe and give it a 5-star review.
See you next time.
This has been a Bread Dog Studios production.